Hi, this is Paul Tyler with another episode of our Lunchtime Innovation Live. Laura, welcome, and tell us, who do we have on our show today? We've got a great guest for you.
We do have a great guest. Yeah, it's great to be back here reporting live from the kitchen. Today we have Alex Robnett from Elementus, and we're going to be talking about all things blockchain. So with that, Alex, why don't you introduce yourself, kind of let people know who you are, what you do, what your company does?
Sure thing. Yeah, sounds good. And Laura, Paul, thank you very much for having me on. Excited to talk with you guys again. It's been a while since we've been face-to-face, but making the most of it with Zoom. So I think this is like my 5,000th Zoom call for like the past few weeks. I'm sure everyone out there can relate to that. So I work for a company called Elementus, and we're really tackling the problem of blockchain data and making it readable and making it comprehensible to the average user out there. I used to be in investment management. That was my main career since when I graduated the University of Tennessee. Moved up to DC, worked for a consulting firm, and eventually made my way to Connecticut. And worked in insurance asset management for close to 8 years. Mainly working in fixed income on the bond desk, which is the bread and butter of insurance asset management. And then eventually found my way to Nassau Re after working at the Hartford. I worked in their private placements desk. So great group of individuals over there. And then when this Nassau Reimagine thing came up, I got introduced to you, Paul, and really was there on the ground floor. It's been amazing what you guys have been able to put together since then. But eventually I left Nassau Re and pursued an opportunity at Elementus. It was actually a company that I was familiar with the CEO, and he wanted somebody to join on business development. So 7 months later, I got promoted to chief strategy officer, which is kind of a lot more responsibility. But the way it boils down is I'm still allowed to speak about the great things that we're accomplishing. I work with a very, very talented group of people behind me that are producing some amazing stuff. So very exciting to be on like the bleeding edge of this industry. So, and again, thank you so much for having us on here. Excited to talk about, high level things about what blockchain is.
Yeah. And by the way, it was our loss there, the company's gain. You were exceptionally valuable in working with some of our startups coming in. And I know you got super high marks from all of them in terms of advice you're giving on fundraising stuff. So I'm sure you're bringing a lot of that magic to Elementus. But yeah, why don't we dig into blockchain? I mean, this is one of those topics where, wow, blockchain was hot. It was going to change our world. You talk about that technology, curve, the hype curve. I mean, it was there. Now, I still think it is enormous. I still believe this will have a tremendous impact on our business. I'm thinking, think just in the last couple of months, COVID-19. What do we do? We need contact tracers. Where did Alex go? How do we actually track and know who he talked to and where? There's so many opportunities here. Tell us, what is it? What's going on? Catch us up.
Yeah. So good segue. It's definitely this ambiguous term, right? That there may be some misinformation out there as like what blockchain is. Like, okay, how does it relate to this cryptocurrency stuff going on? The hype train, no one can argue that it was definitely fueled, just overall interest level of, through Bitcoin and other forms of digital assets that are using, blockchain protocols to kind of regulate how these assets are transferred, across decentralized networks. And that's really the key term, is a decentralization. And, blockchain itself is a protocol, is a type of decentralized network where I no longer have to rely on a central party to be the ultimate record keeper of how things are transacted between different participants on a network. Blockchain makes it possible through, complicated, cryptography that multiple individuals or multiple entities can belong to the same network and transact information really across that network without having to rely on a central party. And of course, we're in the age of, where hacks occur all the time and personal information is stolen. And there's weak points where one, central database has all of our credit history and all of our personal information that can be, ultimately sold to the highest bidder right online. Blockchain can help mitigate that stuff from a privacy perspective, but also from a protection of that information from bad actors. But really, what it boils down to is diminishing the reliance on central parties, central record keepers, and allowing these different entities or different individuals to communicate one another, across one another without having to rely on like a central party to audit those records to really build out that network. That's a very, very high level, and you could go into the weeds for that. That's generally like what blockchain is. Again,
So one problem is I guess to solve is industries where that would actually make a big difference in our business. Like I kind of look at the insurance space, and I think there are a lot of opportunities. Yeah. Today, some things that do exist, some things that don't. Agent fraud, right? There are only a limited set of agents. Really, who is this person I'm dealing with? What is their track record? Is this somebody who I can trust or not? Now, FINRA broker check system in place kind of sort of does it, but doesn't do it in our space. Another, this is only an insurance company. Do you know this kind of stuff? It's called the MIB. So you apply for an insurance policy. We check for fraud to say, okay, are you applying for 10 policies at once, or are you a name that we know, and are there issues associated with it? But it's not blockchain. It exists. It's expensive. Probably not expensive enough for carriers to say, hey, let's knock down this building and start from scratch. So where's blockchain starting to gain critical mass in the last couple of years? Maybe here in the U.S. to start with.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll keep it in the scope of insurance use cases, and I can speak of there's other use cases obviously outside for enterprise uses, right? If we're just talking solely about blockchain as a technology, you had mentioned agent risk, right? That there's like it's solely dependent on like some sort of human data, like data personnel to input records into a system, and ultimately that central record location is managed by a human interpreter. There's systems that work with each other and help validate, and we use Excel spreadsheets to help the numbers tie and things like that. But inherently, it's you run the risk of having the old saying of a garbage in, garbage out mentality. So blockchain could help. Let's say I have a new relationship with an agent, right? If his information is being uploaded by some of these companies that you're speaking with now about automating the process of how claims are uploaded through the system, or how relationships are built, and he takes my information, uploads it into the system. If he's uploaded to a decentralized network that's where these records are kept autonomously without having to go through a middle person of inputting that information, it takes the risk away of garbage in, garbage out, but then also keeps him in check as well, because at any time I can audit his whole history of transactions with every person that he's dealt with in a private, and blocking obviously private information, but I could see where there could be, I could almost have a sanity check on my end to see like, okay, how do the records look for like this person? And I can put trust in those records, knowing that they've been kept and validated in a way that's away from, that's outside, the element of human behavior. But we've talked a lot about like, okay, when's blockchain coming in, and like, what's the first use case really? And really in insurance, I think this whole idea of moving towards health records, like medical records being, it's a pain in the butt right now to go into a doctor and have a relationship for 5 or 10 years, and all of a sudden you move and then you have to fill out other forms. It would be nice if there was a decentralized network where multiple healthcare providers can communicate with one another, but then also share patient information. But there's ways to share that patient information on these decentralized networks where only I have access. Only I can tie my name to this record. So there's a element of like, privacy that could still be implemented. And then that goes back to a lot of the risk mitigants that this technology can offer. So, but when that occurs, it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard. You touched on a point about these systems have existed for so long that, convincing enterprises that it's a worthwhile task to really trudge through the legacy databases and stuff and clean these up, that's a dinosaur task in of itself. But I think the possibilities really speak for itself, but it takes that leap of faith in a way to kind of take that first step.
Yeah, I certainly, I'm involved in this board of American companies that meet with Chinese insurance companies. Very, very interesting. Bill Shang runs this. He actually lived in Hartford or worked at Limmer for a number of years. So cross connections are interesting. I've heard lots of use cases in China for the blockchain. This is one of those threads I want to pull more and more. But just a couple questions for you. So some of these use cases now, obviously, currency. I understand why you'd want a publicly accessible blockchain. Are the first blockchains that will be successful here in the U.S. Do you think they're going to be public, or do you think they're going to be private?
Okay, so I knew this question was coming at some point, and it's a difficult one to kind of wrap our head around because, in a way, there's like this libertarian mindset, with blockchain to having, I have freedom of choice with how I manage my own access to capital, right? And blockchain has the potential to really open up borders for any number of different cultures or different individuals across the world to have free access to capital and able to transact that capital as they see fit, right? The system right now is definitely, there's some hiccups involved, but it's also very convoluted. Like the financial services sector is huge and it's connected to a lot of different things. Now, for privacy perspective, or whether a blockchain would be public, really how we see it at Elementus, first off, like we are advocates for privacy. Truly. And it's a lot of people, they think, you work with financial services and deal with AML, for instance. Like we look at the blockchain as for digital currencies and help financial services mitigate their risk on their end, knowing who they want to interact with. And that's within their right to know that. We provide them access to that information. So someone may say, well, how could you advocate for privacy? Well, I'm an individual as well. I don't want my bank account information out there for everyone to see. The blockchain is inherently transparent. Okay, and Bitcoin is a public ledger. But where we step in is making that data comprehensible. It is public, but it's very hard to see what's going on, even at an entity level. And we're not into looking at individual information. We look at things more on an entity level, but we do see that, and this goes along a lot with what I think, there's going to be a meld of privacy and public elements within the protocol, whatever the future digital money may be. It's going to have elements of both, okay? Because I may interact with someone that's totally okay with not knowing where my funds came from and what the fungibility of those tokens is, and that's within their choice. But I also may interact with a vendor, be it a bank or be it someone I may buy groceries for, like in the next 10 years, that they want to know where my funds are coming from. So there may be an element of like selective disclosure, and it's totally up to me to disclose that information. That's really where we see things going. But there are privacy concerns, and no doubt in with the Chinese market, it may make sense, with how things are managed over there. Having things on more public access may work in their favor, and that's that may be something they want to adhere to. But the way we see it is that the protection of personal information, but also the opportunity of selective disclosure, it's going to be a blend of the two things. The extremes are not going to work. So
right.
You mentioned cryptocurrency. You mentioned the medical records, and we talked a little bit about agriculture, and that was interesting to me because as somebody who obviously eats food, you hope that your food is coming from a safe, secure location. So can you talk about how is this used in supply chain in ag, especially?
Sure thing. Yeah, sure thing. And good question. So I think Walmart was doing a trial case of this technology and tracking, how when they selected from food producers or across the world. Let's say they were working with a kale producer, like in Mexico or some part of like the Western United States. They could track, using blockchain, the records of where every point in the supply chain of where that piece of kale or that bushel of kale like arrived and was put on a truck and then shipped farther down the supply chain, every movement of that is tracked in an immutable ledger that is not dictated by someone typing up data like on a screen, right, and then having to check through an Excel sheet whether they got it right. It's all in a inherently trusted system. So the use cases of that let's say that kale hits the shelves, but then there's an outbreak of some kind of foodborne illness. For instance, Laura, you have kids, so this is like probably top of your mind, like the food that you put on your kids' table, you want to make sure it's clean, right? Same thing from my perspective. If I heard that there was an E. coli outbreak in kale and they pointed it to, a bad batch that may have been produced by some kind of supplier to Walmart could then immediately identify through the supply chain blockchain that they have where the ultimate source would be, like through for an exact record in an objective lens, because they're looking at the data objectively with how that information is being shared across a blockchain network. So instead of shutting the whole supply chain down and then going back through records manually, tracking that stuff through a blockchain all the way through the record, but having a way to look at it and analyze it quickly, maybe through a service that Elementus could provide. That's really where the efficiencies in analyzing this information could really be a great benefit.
Well, I think that's where partnerships with insurance companies could potentially accelerate it, because if I'm doing, I don't know, who writes insurance for food on shelves, right, to avoid recalls? Because I can only, avocados. What was the last thing that got shut down? It was like romaine lettuce. Okay, don't eat romaine lettuce for the next 60 days. Right. Right. So I would think that if I could either offer insurance that's never been offered, or I could offer cheaper insurance on the products in the shelves. And I don't know that particular market, as long as the product is like on that blockchain. Now, have you seen anything like this, or?
So I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar personally, but with anything like this. But I'm sure there's people smarter than me that are thinking about this problem. But you bring up a great point. Pricing insurance is critical, and right now the way we do it, I mean, some things are somewhat bespoke, right? There are instruments out there that are bespoke, but if anything, blockchain can make things for supply chain reasons like this. We live in a world of asymmetric markets, like asymmetric market information. We deal with these economic disparities of like what information I have and what someone else doesn't have. I think blockchain itself is going to really introduce some interesting economic pieces here, and especially for insurance, because now I can price something with more of a concrete view of like how the risk is associated with whatever the underlying asset is. And that goes along with, again, like with health records, for instance, I could be pricing health insurance tailored exactly to like what the underlying risk of like a certain patient is, while protecting that patient's information. But then as these automated systems, again, with these companies, these wonderful companies that are at Nassau Re space, as they begin to connect their own machine learning, algorithms or their methods of data science to analyze this information, they're going to have to access a database that's free from a centralized authority. Because at the end of the day, if we're pricing this stuff accurately, or if I'm having a better view as to like what's going on, the last thing I'm going to do is like, okay, we're all working in conjunction with each other, but I definitely trust that one company to manage this data for me. No, it's going to be a consortium of all those companies together that have shared trust within this network. And then where Elementus would come in would be, blockchain data inherently is not meant for analytics. Okay, in order to make the scalability function, it needs to be coded in a way for scalability and transaction speed. Okay. So that makes the data somewhat redundant and messy. But where we come in, where we really differentiate from the market, is we look at blockchains agnostically, be it digital assets or enterprise stuff. We provide the lens to how to view this stuff. We want to be the master indexer of this information, and we will be. Now, much like how Google was the master of like page ranking, across the web and providing a lens to see what's really going on the internet. Now Google is like the main viewpoint for that. That's really what we're trying to provide.
Yeah, interesting. Well, hey, Deborah Sisitsky's on. She actually says, "Hey, Deborah, how are you? Some point, I'm gonna get back there and start making some more stuff on your laser printers. You know Deborah, Alex, right? Have you met Deborah? Yeah. So she said they're actually working to develop now I don't even know what this is, a low raw WAN wireless network with helium blockchain.
Okay.
I don't know. Can you interpret that?
Okay, everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, so listen. So I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the space, but if there's a wide area network that's being regulated by a blockchain protocol like Helium, it sounds fascinating. I need to learn more about this stuff. There's so much changing in this space that it's hard even for me to stay on top of everything. But I would love to learn more about that.
Okay, well, we'll connect you after the show.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here's another hard one. Okay. So security.
Ask away.
Okay. So China. I read weird stuff, Alex. I strange places on the internet.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
So they actually announced that they have a quantum. They actually did a test with quantum computing where they put a satellite up to two stations and were able to actually send an encrypted key over a quantum network. Mm-hmm. Now, for those of you who don't know quantum computing, it's kind of like astrophysics meets signal processing theory. So I can effectively simultaneously change the signal or frequency of a object, millions of light years away. Don't ask me anymore. But the speed of the computing power is like astronomically higher, faster than the others. Now we've got great encryption today. I know that those machines would eat our encryption for lunch. Does that argue more for having publicly accessible data versus trying to pretend that you can make this private and lock it up?
Yeah. So first of all, the questions are tough, Paul. But I would expect nothing less. Yes. So the idea of quantum computing, right? It's not if, it's when. With quantum computing really being available on everyone's desk, right? Like right now, I still rely on a classic motherboard that works with a classical style silicone architecture, right? And what you're referring to is qubits. Like instead of just 0 or 1, a qubit in a quantum computer can both be 0, 1 at the same time. But then once it's directed towards solving a problem, it becomes again I'm no physicist, but it becomes either 0, 1, and that's what drives its computing power. So you're right. So the ability to decrypt stuff with using a quantum computer is exponentially greater than any kind of method we have now. It is an inherent threat to the way cryptography works on blockchain. But I'm not saying it's an argument from having information accessed on a public database that may be decentralized using a blockchain protocol or some kind of permissioned architecture. I think there's going to be elements, especially as we work with scalability of these protocols. Again, blockchain protocols are not inherently sexy or attractive. They're kind of like this protocol that runs in the background, much like TCP/IP does. But there's probably going to be elements of like low tech data protection that's going to help prevent some kind of quantum computer that's going to add that extra layer of difficulty where it may be difficult for a quantum computer to kind of breach that low tech environment that's not built on generating a series of characters in a string that would ultimately give me a private key access to like some record management on a blockchain. Does that make sense? I think there's going to be elements of adding those two things in there that'll hopefully block that off. What that is, again, I don't know. I'm not a physicist. I am a lowly economics graduate from the University of Tennessee. Great program, by the way. So I will say that. Great program and great folks over there. But again, these are problems that people much smarter than me are going to solve. But I don't think it's a threat. I really don't. I think the value in what this stuff can really provide us as we move more towards an automated world far exceeds the risk that, from the onset, a quantum computer does have the ability to kind of decrypt this stuff, but we're going to find ways around that. We always do. We always find ways to kind of improve these systems.
Yeah. So, Laura, what are the questions we have for Alex?
What did you just say? No, I'm just kidding. Deborah is commenting on here. So Alex, tonight, if you have some free time, they actually have a workshop on helium taking place this evening. So FYI there. Okay. Ojala is on as well. Hello, Ojala. She's learning so many new things. So as am I. I was going to start the episode by saying, what is blockchain? Asking for a friend. But clearly it is so many things. But something you said earlier, the consortium of shared trust. Yep. It's interesting to hear how all of this technology is surrounded by, this shared trust, right? We always go back to that thing. And I think it's something that, as a society we're working on. My co-host agrees. But, I guess my question for you would be, what do you think the next thing is for blockchain? Is it going to be finally accepted and utilized on a greater scale? Is it going to morph and turn into zeros, ones, threes, sevens in the color orange? Or like, what do you think it's going to be next?
Yeah. Good question. So there's really two pathways, like the big advertising factor, I go back to like the sexiness factor of it right now is still in the digital asset side. A lot of attraction with financial services, looking at an asset that is asymmetric in its risk profile for like someone who's talented in trading assets, then they're going on to another asset that doesn't really have much correlation to the overall market. There's a lot of money to be made. I mean, that's where, but as capital gets flown into these new ventures, a lot of development can occur. So I think still the digital assets have more ground to gain on maybe enterprise adoption of blockchain solutions. But there's a lot of movement in the background. I mean, IBM and with their Hyperledger consortium that they're working with other companies on, there's a lot of movement there. We had talked a little bit about use cases, supply chain, for instance, or like looking at food chain, the food supply, for instance. There's a lot of use cases there. I'm really interested in, and again, this may be my my science fiction self-talking. I want to see where blockchain fits within all of these other technologies we have out there. I have this, the speaking points I usually use are, we have the advent of 5G, right? That increases our bandwidth for all these technologies to kind of come in. And we have machine learning, these smart databases, which really, use the 5G ARC infrastructure, the pipes where all this bandwidth allows us to transact this information at hyper speed. So, but this data gets saved down. Then we have AI on top of that, which is interpreting that data. And then, but the blockchain is really going to be the rule set that regulates how all of these systems fit in with one another. And going back to your comment on, consortium of trust, there's just common topic with how people describe blockchain, right, as like this trustless system. I don't agree with that term. I think that's a misnomer. I think it's we've relied so long on systems of delegated trust. I delegate my trust in my financial records, my financial assets to a bank, right?
Mark Zuckerberg. Yes.
Yeah. Or my private information is now being, probably sold for the highest bidder. Who knows what's going on? But I delegate it to a central party, right? But now we're entering the age of inherent trust, an inherent trust of these consortiums that interact with one another. And, what I get excited about next is what's the new version of the internet going to look like? Where we don't have to go through Google to kind of, search up what's this wealth of information that's out there and accessible to anyone. We live in a great time of access to information and, breaking down barriers of like, be it government control in some, foreign entity or just a corporate control of how I access or how I make communicate or choose to communicate ideas. I think that's really, I'm not saying decentralize everything, which is like been the motto was definitely decentralized everything was the motto in 2017. But blockchain has a space in there and it's a protocol with how we're going to be able to communicate to one another. And hopefully it keeps breaking down, those barriers. That's
Hey, this is great. You're in Alex, I think you've done just a great job kind of simplifying, but expanding our view of what's possible here. Hopefully in Hartford, listen, somewhere between New York, Hartford and Boston, we do something really cool here with blockchain and insurance in the next couple of years. So Laura, let's just sort of talk. Yeah, you were a star last week. We were off because we gave Laura a break. Tell us what happened last week here in here in the area?
Yeah, it was actually a great opportunity with Insurtech Hartford. So Stacy Brown's group had put on it was a 3-month long process of an event where startups applied from all around the world. And we had the awards event last Thursday. So there were 7 winners that all got selected in different kinds of categories. But I had, my first go at it. I think I made Paul proud. I created my own little green screen with, green poster boards, and they just kind of orbited me inside of the studio digitally. So it was a really good opportunity to kind of co-commentate with Devin from Beasley. But it was a great event, and again, kudos to Insurtech Hartford for all that work, and congratulations to all the winners.
Yeah, that's awesome. And why don't you talk about what's coming up in July?
Yeah, so in July, there's a few things. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our next innovation hour.
Oh, that's right. Yes, who?
Kurt Gem is going to come on, and he's going to be talking about empathetic leadership. And the part that I'm even more interested about is the personality AI. So, be sure to tune in for that, because Kurt has this tool that you're going to want to use on all of your colleagues, and definitely any of your bosses.
I do.
I'm already using it. So, but fast forwarding through that, the week of July 13th through the 17th, we are putting on what is called, it is the Northeast Insurtech Week, and it is an Insurtech alliance with 5 different organizations. So Insurtech New York, Insurtech Hartford, Kesnays, Nassau Re and CIC over at the Innovation Underwriters with Charlie Sidoti out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it's 5 days of programming during the week of July 13th, all different focus areas, and it's going to be really great. So we're going to push out more information. We'll have the link up, but it's definitely something for people to tune into and keep learning, because clearly, as Alex has shown us today, even a piece of kale can be extremely interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully that wasn't heard too loudly. I've had my share of kale too while I've been here.
Yeah, well, Laura will invest when you start to do blockchains for chickens, so she'll be really angel around.
Right.
Yeah,
it's right around the corner.
All right. Hey, well, listen, Alex, thanks. Laura, thanks, and thanks for all of you for coming in. Alex, what's the best way to get in touch with you if people have questions?
Sure thing. So my information, I think, is shared on y'all's original post on LinkedIn. That's always a great way to get in touch with me. But if not, if you'd rather go by email, my email is alex@elementus, elementus.io.
Okay, excellent. All right, everybody, have a great lunch. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next time for another episode of our Innovation Hour. And we'll give some really good insight into how you build teams to do things like Elementus. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.